I'm going to introduce one of my idols. Ooh. It's a really weird thing, you know, when you watch people on the telly or on the YouTube for your knowledge, and over a few years you start to meet them people, Ian Crane or Masaru Emoto, whoever you meet, and you sort of go, God, that's someone I really look up to. I've sort of admired them. It's not like meeting Benny off Crossroads or like a newsreader. There's a different value to it, and as I said, I've seen John several times now and watched many of his videos, and he's talking about some of the ephemeral sciences that when you start looking at them, you can't believe we didn't learn it at school. You know, like if you watch a man with a microphone and a speaker do some cymatics, it makes you cry. It's so beautiful and so intricate and so quickly it's a cipher for how life and cellular division occurs. Obviously I'm rambling. I'm going to introduce John Byde because he's excellent. Thank you very much.
Well, this talk is originally it was based on the work of Victor Schauberger. It still is to some extent, but I'm interested in things that float around. Everybody talks about gravity, and I'm interested in levity. So if it's true what you get what you focus on, I've changed my language to I'd like a levity bubble, thank you very much, rather than just an ordinary car. So when I started about 10 years ago, I was studying water, mainly to clean large buildings. But in Google, I put in a term to do with water, and through some of the searches came this guy called Victor Schauberger I'd never heard of, and it was just sort of a mind-blowing experience. So over the years, I studied and I read all the books. There's 4 books. There's a lot of images that I'll be showing you on one of these sections, which are lifted from the books, the Eco-Technology series, and they're a translation from the Austrian, from Schauberger. He was Austrian. So his life covers, he was born late 1890s and passed in about 1955, last century. But generated some amazing ideas, and we'll be going through some of his evolution. But the one thing about the study is it's a bit of an intellectual exercise. Obviously you have an interest, otherwise you wouldn't be bothering. But it's not as if you sat in a geography class, because you're setting your own timetable, you're setting your own agenda, if you like, and you're reading things. And when I was doing my experiences, what I decided to do, or I wanted to do somewhere, was to have some connection with the work I was studying. So in this section I'll be showing you, well, it's a discovery I've made directly related to Schauberger's work, but initially what I'll be talking about is mainly Schauberger's work and what it means to do with shapes. And over the years I've talked to lots of scientists about this, because when I make my little discoveries I think, well, doesn't everybody know about this? Better go and talk to some PhDs somewhere. And that's why I came up, I don't know if you know about the laws of thermodynamics, but there's 3 basic laws of thermodynamics. So I wrote the 4th one, which is up there. Don't mess with the top 3 or you don't get your funding next year. Seems to be the main driving force for what we call our discoveries. You know, who's your lobbyist and where you're getting your money from, and you will be doing this. Forget about that, you know, it's not for you. So anyway, we go on to Schauberger. And in a way, we're probably going to cover a lot of ideas. Some of them is a bit mind-blowing, and so I'm going to be a little bit unfair to you, because you're going to get a condensate of about 10 years worth of study and some applied work. So you're going to get, I don't know, it depends where you're at, but I get feedback from people later saying maybe you could cover a little bit less. But I'm familiar with it, so I'm kind of used to it. So anyway, that's an apology for you before we start. We'll see how it goes. So this is the dude. This is basically what he looks like and where he was from and what he came up with. Well, this bit here, it's sort of familiar shape, but this shape, the sycamore seed, we all know so well. And that's designed to do one thing, which is to float down from the tree and float across on the wind and spread its seed. But the way it does that, the shape it's using, is actually to slow its fall down. That's to break, slow down. It doesn't want to hit the earth. It's a shape that is designed to break its fall. So the humans looking at this then design all of their propulsion units, aeroplane propeller, aeroplane wing, similar, engine for a big ship, Now you're probably familiar with these shapes, and that's a turbine. It works slightly differently, but mainly that's that. So they're using a shape to move a fluid that's designed to slow it down. How dumb can you get? But anyway, back to a bit more, shall we? He was a forester in Austria, and he didn't take a conventional. He had the opportunity. All his siblings went to the posh universities, but he didn't. He stayed in the high mountains in Austria and studied water. He used to hunt and fish up there, and he was involved through his family with transporting timber, and this is how they used to do it, down the rivers, because that's all we had. You used to chuck logs in the river, fell them, chuck them in the river, let them float down to the sawmill down there. There's lots of problems with this because they sink, they get jammed, and then you have to free them off and let them float down. But while he was watching them, he was looking at, he noticed things like in the river, it changed depending on the time of year. So the best time to move timber was in the winter time on a full moon, because he'd followed it many times through different seasons, how the timber worked. So the question is begged, why would timber move down the river in winter under a full moon? You know, it sounds a bit like witchcraft, but some of it is highly practical, and we'll get onto that, because basically what they did is they felled all the easy access timber, then they wanted to get it out from the high mountains, and somebody had heard about Schauberger's work, and the person who heard about it, funny enough, was the wife of a prince something von Lippe. He'd lost all his money on the gambling tables, but he had loads of timber up in the mountains, and they wanted to extract it and transport it downstream, down to the mills, as efficiently as possible. So it was like a practical problem. And his wife knew about Schauberger's ideas because his are unconventional. So she approached him, and they kind of did a deal. They had to get 1,000 cubic feet of timber down the mountain to make this idea viable. And how was he going to do it? Well, the way he decided to do it, he already knew how he was going to do it. He built log flumes, which are designed on an egg. I mean, I've inverted it here, that's the maths, but we won't go into that. These were developed by his son in later years, the maths of the ideal shape. But he built this flume based on the egg, or the pointy end of the egg. And you can see there the shadow on that profile, what the shape is. And the reason he did that is because it lends itself to spinning the water. So we'll see some shapes in a minute. So basically, what his discovery is on the left side are the masculine energies, which go from the inside out, from the inside outwards. These are the masculine energies, same shape. So you get the same shape, the hyperbolic cone this is, which is the same shape water makes as it goes down your plug hole. And that's what he's going to use to generate down his log flumes. But this is the shape, the breaking shape. This is the shape that the energy from the inside radiating out. The faster you go, the more resistance there is, the more friction there is. That's the masculine energy. Those are the shapes that nature uses to take things apart. On the other side, you might say, well, I make a comparison. There's a sort of glass ceiling here. On this side, you've got all your hot energies, hot nuclear, internal combustion engines, and on this other side you've got a whole undeveloped technology, and these are the feminine energies that's going from the outside in, that's centripetal. And the combination, in the comparison he makes between the two for power, this one, which is suction, this one's pressure, this one is 120 times more powerful than that on its own. So if you want to design anything, you design it on this end. The faster you go, the colder it runs, and the less friction there is. So a lot of people now are coming up with what they call 0 point energy. There's no such thing as free energy, you're just converting one thing to another. So it's a bit of a misnomer to call it free. So Keshe in Iran is calling it meterless energy. You don't need a meter on your energy. See, on this side it's all hot. That's your hot nuclear, it's all centralized. On this side, it's all decentralized. That's when you have a little unit in your backyard, you know, as big as that stool, putting out 15 kilowatts, and it'll probably be running cold. But we'll get on to some of these technologies later. But this is the basic outline of the glass ceiling, and hence the fourth law of thermodynamics I said earlier. That diagram, it shows the same sort of thing. It's just showing the outline and various points on this outline of the hyperbolic, which is this shape. It goes like this. You can probably guess what it looks like. it's a plane at infinity going to a point at infinity.
Yes,
I can't do anything about it actually. It's just the kit we've got, but we're not missing a lot. We'll move along. Yeah, that's a bit hard to see, but the shape he was talking about, he calls it, and what you're going towards is what's called this inwinding flow. Instead of expanding your energy outwards and creating friction, you want to bring it together to a sort of central point. So the shape that he based a lot of his ideas on, and his machines, because he did build machines, we'll get onto them, is based on this shape on the left, which seems to be one of the ideal shape, and that is from an antelope in Africa. It's called a kudu. There's two things in the winding that's going on. One, you can see a spiral starting larger and getting smaller, coming towards the centre, but also the water, when it goes down these, does one revolution for every turn, so it's in perfect synchronicity. It's a bit like an ice skater bringing her arms into the centre, and as they do it, she spins faster, or he does. It's that sort of energy. So he designed on that principle. These outlines are showing how the energy flows actually in a river. So if you have an established river, when it's going around that bend, it is spinning clockwise. When it's going around that bend, it's spinning anti-clockwise. And the centre of the rotation you see is put on there. You can see the two dots. So it's doing a winding motion down its floodplain. And what rivers do, they have always a spiralling. Anything that they call drag or resistance, which we'll have a look at in a minute, are all vortices, but they're at 90 degrees to the direction you want to go, so you call that drag. Actually it's lift, but in the wrong direction, because you got your shapes wrong. So what the rivers do, nature is showing us, if this river, as it flows down its riverbed, is left in its own, he called it naturalesque position, i.e. it's cooled by the trees, you haven't disrupted it, it's in its natural form, it'll never flood. It's impossible for that river to flood. And I know some rivers like that because I've been as a whitewater canoeist and an instructor in Norway, Sweden, Scandinavia, this country. So I used to read rivers, and I used to go into all kinds of rivers. Some of them after massive snow melts in the spring, or after the autumn floods, especially in Norway. So I used to go to particular rivers, and they never broke their banks. They were established in their banks energetically, and they never flooded. Now we're getting flooding. And one of the reasons we're getting flooding is we're changing the shape. We think, as engineers, that it should be long and straight, because that way you're going to get more water out of the mountains and down to the river. You don't. The fastest way, the most efficient way to move a fluid is not a straight line. It's a lovely winding sinuous curve, the same shape water makes when it flows down your shower screen. So if you haven't looked, next time you look, have a look at the little dance water does down your shower screen, and you'll notice it doesn't go zik, it does this amazing dance. Have you ever watched it? You know what I'm talking about? Oh yeah, and to illustrate the shape earlier, you can have a look at this if you want. That is roughly the shape. These are made on Dartmoor by the Centre for Implosion Research, and I got that many years ago. So that's what water's trying to do, I think, is close a circle. So it's always trying to close the circle. Obviously under gravity it can't, but without gravity it wouldn't be falling. So anyway, what Schauberger did with his log flumes, he got the shapes right, and he also had a holding pond which was actually egg-shaped, not easy to see there. And this is a section through that, like you're looking on the side. And what the water does is the densest water is at the bottom, and the less dense at the top. And water, when it's less dense, like most things, expands, except at 4 degrees. And that's called the anomaly point of water. It's the only fluid that we know that when it's frozen or its solid form is actually lighter than its liquid form. Yep. So water at 4 degrees sinks, and the ice forms on the top, which is kind of backwards thinking. I mean, if you're going to design it or think about it as an engineer, it shouldn't do that. Everything else does the opposite, except water. So that's one of the anomaly points of water. There are many. The other that's noticeable, we all know about, whether you realise it or not, is what's called the specific heat of water. And that's where it's one point where it takes a lot more energy to heat it up or cool it down, and that point is our body temperature. Because that's where it takes the most energy to heat up, cool down. That's why we can tolerate more heat and cold. So we've got Eskimos and we've got people who live in the desert. So anyway, we get a bit off point there, but This water at the bottom is at 4 degrees, and he's got pipes coming up to his log flumes from that 4-degree dense water, which he introduces and spins down his log flume. And we'll have a look at the shapes, you'll get the hang of it as we go along. So he's very clever in what he did, and on the log flume as it went down, obviously it warmed up, so he'd ship off some of the warm water and bring in the cold water. And that's the shape it makes going down the river. And he calls this the longitudinal vortex, cold water in the middle, warmer water on the outside. So it's when it's in the right design, it's what's called a self-accelerating flow. But the other thing about rivers, if they only did that and they weren't laminar, they would flow down the mountain with a massive force and you wouldn't have any mountains. But what it does is it has back eddies and it slows itself down. It actually breaks itself, slows it down. So here's another description, and this is up here because the river is winding up energy. It actually, when it's doing this, and he called this a naturalesque form, he had to invent terms like biomagnetism, bioelectricity, which is natural electricity as opposed to what we put through our wires. So he's discovering things and he had to name them. And so later on in this, what he calls a positive temperature gradient, anything going towards 4 degrees, he called a positive temperature gradient. From 0 to 4, from 100 degrees down to 4 is a positive temperature gradient, and you get as much, if not more. You might, if you're interested in chemistry, you'd get more on that side than you do on the hot side, where we synthesize things using heat, because he was synthesizing things using natural shapes and natural energies. So when you wind the energy up, if you want to call it that, it's like a clock spring, and eventually it gets so much energy. At this point, this would be a ford in the river, it dumps all its energy. It just goes out into the countryside, boom, like, and he calls it an energy cannon, which is happening constantly, which re-energizes the trees and the bioforms around the river. So that's where you get your ford, as in Oxford, or the shallow point in the river. And then it starts winding up again, and then he's looking at the shapes of the river. He's paying attention to every detail to do with how the water is moving when it's in its natural state, not when it's been messed with. All of our rivers just about have been mucked about with. There's not many that are moving naturalesquely. You'd have to go high up into the peaks or Scotland or Wales to see them doing that. These are just other shapes to illustrate what's happening in a river. So you've got laminar flow, colder water at the bottom flowing faster, and this is what he began to harness in his machines later. So that's cold water and that's warmer layers, and you'll see, I'll show you some of my pictures which show that water, in fact, when it's spinning it doesn't mix, and when it's in certain flows it won't mix. You'd think everything mixes with everything, it's all water. It's not, because it has temperature differentiation, it has minerals in it, it has salts in it, it has all kinds of things in it. In fact, in the Second World War, the subs, when they wanted to run silent and run deep, would either find a thermocline or a salt or a saline dense water. They'd know where it was and they could sit there and switch the engines off and just float on under ocean rivers. And it's one of the things he mentions to the conventional science is the Gulf Stream. How does that stream of water flowing under the ocean actually flow uphill? Because it's coming from the Gulf of Mexico and it climbs mountains and valleys, and we get it, and it washes our west coast. That's why we have, quite a mild climate compared to the same line of latitude as Canada, which is frozen. But so water can do some very odd things, some unusual things. It can levitate, it can float, it can do all kinds of weird stuff. But basically this is your nice river shape. When you start messing with it or changing its temperature, you get these odd anomalies. It starts digging in its base, it goes crazy basically, and that's when it floods. That's when you start to get flooding. This shape, that's been destroyed by whatever means. Either you've felled all the trees, or you've interfered with it, or you've poisoned it in some way, so now it floods. It's kind of telling you. And we can see this is true because of all the floods that are happening around our lovely globe. But if you have the naturalesque patterns installed, there's no flooding. One is altering the other, you might say, to do with rainfall and also flooding. Anyway, to take the idea on, it is hard to see, but this is called he built this pipe. It's a breathing pipe, and he made a fin which fits in this pipe to make the water spin. And basically he was spinning water down this pipe, and he reckoned you could put grey water in the top of a 40-foot pipe, maybe 5 or 6 inch diameter, and the water coming out the bottom would be pure. And one of the reasons is because of what happens in the section of the pipe, which you can see better here. The water's caused to spin in this looping motion like a toroid around the outside, and the cold core water's going down the middle. The positive signs represent oxygen. Oxygen goes to the outside, and also comes through the wooden pipe, so it's oxygenated as it goes. And so do the bacteria. All the bacteria, most of which they don't like oxygen, so they're killed by the oxygen and by these fins, which are silver plated. So he's very keen on different metals. He's very keen on copper. I think he would have used gold if he could get enough, but copper was the next best thing. So he's very interested in materials, metals, copper, tin, brass, but mainly copper he used in the making of his machines. So how to retrain your streams and your rivers. This is he called a energy body. Well, it's an egg again. And the egg shape, as I said, is the inverse of the hyperbolic, and that's what nature puts energy in if she wants to grow something. So in a chicken, you've got chickens' eggs, lots of eggs, and so he's using this to regenerate or retrain the energy body, as he calls it, of the river. So if you've got a problem with your flooding streams, you find the optimal place to put one of these, just anchored in the base. It's got a tether, and the water spins round the egg. And it accelerates, it starts to accelerate, hence the dip. So then you can retrain, sounds odd, doesn't it? It's like retraining a wayward dog, but that's what he was suggesting you could do. See, as I was saying earlier about our shapes, we're very familiar with an aeroplane. Well, this is crop duster, they call this. So it's coming from up high and it's pulling out, so it's under what's called high wing load. And somebody's placed a smoke canister here, and this vortex is what comes off both wings on every aeroplane. On the main wings, off the propeller, off the tail. And what the engineers try to do is engineer out this, because they call that drag. And like I said, it's lift in the wrong direction, and they'll never achieve their goal because they're using the wrong shapes. So the faster you go in that, the hotter it gets, the noisier it gets, don't we know? We've all heard the thunder rockets going over, just to let us know they're there. They're using the wrong shapes. If they really want to go fast, they've got to create a vacuum in front of themselves and suck themselves through the air. Because that's what he was doing. When he let his logs go down the flume, he tested it the first day and it didn't bloody work. It sank to the bottom even if the water backed up behind it wouldn't go. And what he had to get his men to do overnight is rifle the walls of his log flume to get a spiral going like the river. And once he did that, even upstream when he released them, it sucked the logs down. So they were sucked down, they went down beautifully. Anyway, to finish that story, which I started earlier, they got 1,500 cubic feet of wood down the mountain, so half as much again as they needed to break even. So he got paid out on that one. So he put his money where his mouth was. There's just another illustration of these fractal images. This image here, that's about 100 miles from there to there. And you can see these swirls, very particular looping, very beautiful. Even that one looks like the shape of a section of a jellyfish. I wonder what they know about shapes, because that's what they're using. So that's 100 miles, but if you have your milk in it or your cream in your coffee cup and you drag your spoon through the top of the cup, you'll get the same shapes. So they're fractal. So they work on different scales, and we'll have a look at a little bit of that. Just to illustrate the wing vortices, this is a jet just flown close to the surface of this cloud, and you can see the swirls that are each side of it. So he wanted to know what are the shapes, and he knew he was onto something, so he wanted a shape that would cause what he calls an inwinding flow. So these are all basic iterations or discoveries he's making, and don't forget this is probably late 1920s, 1930s. So we had to find somebody to make these shapes by hand. I mean, the way we do it now is with a 3D printer. But to actually make one of these, that's beaten out of copper. How the heck are you going to make those shapes? That's been one of the major problems, which will be a lot more alleviated now we have what's called 3D printers, because we can design in our CADs complex shapes and then have them printed out by 3D printers. Suppose everybody's heard of 3D printers, have you? Yeah. Well, if you don't, have a look, because they're going to be a real scene changer, because they're going to remove the manufacturing base, because everybody's going to have one, and they're only going to get better. So if you want something, you scan it in, say make one of them. It's real Star Trek.
Companies in America are already producing arms with them.
Yeah, they built. Yeah, that was the beautiful one when somebody made a gun out of one.
Well, I think people like there are theories that people are being prepared for something like a civil war.
Yeah. In
They can
America,
just make their own weapons.
make their own weapons now. Now what you're going to do? No, it's lovely, isn't it? I followed that story. It really floated my boat, you know. And here's one we made earlier. Good old Blue Peter. You can have all those. We'll just go and make another. Ta-ta.
Can you go back to a previous one? You know the previous thing you showed. Are they hollow?
Yeah.
And they put it, and the water goes through them.
Yeah, they're all hollow. That's why they're so difficult to make. But you're going to run the water down there. We'll see some results of running water down these pipes that were tested in the 50s at Stuttgart University. Because don't forget, this is this is like a test. He was to water what Tesla is to electricity, and so he was making all sorts of discoveries which were against the grain. Nobody wanted him to know this or spread this, because everybody has a vested interest. You know, vote for your lobbyists. You know, the politicians just in front. So he was taking a lot of flack because of his ideas. He was having a real struggle to get them going. These are the shapes that nature uses, or this is what they look like. That's the edge of a hurricane front, and that's the plan view of a hurricane. And you know, that's like Florida or something down there. It's like, I don't know, a few hundred miles across. It's big, and it's got no moving parts. And the power in that is absolutely enormous. So with no moving parts, you can do that. So you've got temperature differential, and you've got water, and a bit of Coriolis effect to set it running. So you get amazing effects. And of course, if you see these shapes, you've probably seen them in other talks as well, because they seem to be everywhere. Which is the phi-based spiral, the divine proportion 1 to 1.618, or the Fibonacci ratio generates these same spirals. I just thought I'd let you know. Some people say we're down here, but then if you look at it from the other way, you are down there. Or upside down, you know, it depends how you look at things, doesn't it? But in case you were wondering, that's where you are, and anybody who's feeling lost. But that's the shape. It's the same as that, which you can't see very well differentiated, but you can see the swirls going in. And you have arms on the spiral nebula and all the rest of it. So I'd take that as a hint. I would say Mother Nature is showing us something, have a look at this. But oh no, we're going to do it the other way. Anyway, these are a bunch of shapes that he collected. They are in a book. I can't remember which one he lifted them from, but the plates are also in the Eco-Technology series, published by Gateway, from the translation of Calm Coates. So there's a whole bunch of those you can look at. Spirals, cochlea of the ear, all kinds. Fir cones, very interesting. You have two spirals up fir cones, one's masculine, one's feminine, and guess where the seeds are? They're right on the junction of the two spirals. So you've got two intersecting energies, you generate the next seed on the fir cone. So the fir cone's very well worth watching, and George Adams did a lot of work on that to do with projective geometry and with the Steiner school. Now this is just a reference I found because I'm very interested in some of the simplest shapes to generate. That would be a trout turbine with 3 scoops, and so that's rotating, and the water will be going away from you down there. So you remove your propeller and you stick one of these on, and you should see benefits. And I approached several firms. There's one on the near Clacton-on-Sea, near where I live, that manufacturer. They're called Brunton Propellers, and I talked to the MD there, and I was explaining how the shapes worked, and he was looking at me like he was listening, because he's in charge of this multi-million-pound turnover business, and at the end of it he just did this. I don't know what you're talking about, mate. Looks like it should work, but I don't know what it means, because he just didn't get the shapes. So I tried. That was like pushing a river, as the saying goes. These are some other references. There's Theodor Schwenk, who did a lot of work on these shapes, how nature actually forms almost like liquid. You can look at the bone in your thigh, and you can see all the flows like it's like water flowing past rocks, and it's just frozen in time, and there's all the structures are in there. and that was Theodore Schwenk. And John Wilkes, he passed a couple of years ago, but he's at Forest Row developing flow forms, which now have been, they're manufactured and used, fortunately. In fact, Lucy, who gives a talk, has got one in her garden. But what you're doing is letting the water oscillate, so it'll do a little dance, and this is the whole secret. The water in your pipe that comes out your tap is a water corpse, because we haven't got a clue how to look after our water, and it generates all bacterias, bacteriophages and all kinds of things. Why? Because it's not breathing, it's not moving right, so we introduce chlorine, a bit of fluoride to shut down your pineal, but that's another story. A bit of chlorine to purify or kill the bugs. But if you get the shapes right, you don't need to do all that. You get this wonderful, it's the difference if you go up a mountain and drink from a spring, and you try that and compare it to the stuff you get, especially in East Anglia, the hard water, it's like, is this the same stuff? It's wet, I know it is, but it's not the right sort of energetic stuff. So he called it a water corpse. So if you want to rejuvenate your water corpse, you run it through one of this. Goes down there, do a little swirl that way, and it'll do a little swirl that way, and that's doing a figure of 8. And that shape is called a lemniscate. It's also the shape for an infinity. So you get a little dance going. As soon as you let the water flow, that's what it starts to do, and it gets bigger in that one. Another lemniscate, figure of 8, and then again and again. The figure of 8 lemniscate, which is the shape above the magician's head in the Arcana, isn't it? In the tarot. Anyway, back to a bit more on shapes. Schauberger said there's 3 forms of planetary motion, and he was dropping us a big hint here, because you've got spin on your axis, maybe a little bit of precession, but spin, and you've got orbit around your central body. But actually, you don't orbit around that, so NASA's wrong. The shape NASA gives us of this bull ring, the bullseye effect, like a dartboard, like you're going around the sun, is a crock of shit. It's just wrong. You never see the other side of the sun, because the sun is moving. It's either rising through space or falling through space. So it's either like a bubble rising or a rock falling through space. And all the planets are spiraling around it as it moves, but they only show you the front view, which is like a dartboard, as if you think you're going to see the other side of the sun. The only way you see the other side of the sun is because it's spinning. You don't actually see what it's doing at the front. Some people say it's dark on the leading edge, like a comet, and it's only light as we see it because of certain energies, which we may go into, a bit esoteric. But that's the spiral. That's why you'll have to look this up online, but it's called the long body of the sun, and there's various videos are coming out. So that's the sun. So what in fact you're orbiting around, and the sun is, it's doing a little spiral. So it's doing a wobble, so they're all spiraling around a space as they go through, not a specific body. So we're not spiraling specifically around the sun, but our combined mass, and there's a hole in the centre, if you like. And that's on the arm of galaxy, which is going round the galaxy, and that galaxy's spinning and going around something else, and etc., etc. But so you've got spin on your axis and orbit. And the other form of planetary motion, if you want to call it that, is what's called circulation. So if you get these two, you will call this one. Now that sounds a weird thing to say, but if you get your movements right, you're going to get circulation. So that's magnetic, gravitational, electrical charges, discharges, from whatever your neighbouring sun is. So that's quite interesting. But basically in his shapes, what he's doing is taking the orbital velocity around your object and converting it in the pipe to spin till it got to a point, and by the time it's gone from there to there, it is spinning so darn fast. Whatever's in there, whatever went at the beginning, is not the same thing as in the pipe, because there's energetic exchanges, some call low energy nuclear change, and that's to do with spin rates. So if you're talking about propulsion, which I'm interested in, that's the way you go. So you start to spin things from orbital to spin. I don't know if that makes sense. This might show it better, but this is from a book 60 years old, Rodney Collins Smith, A Theory of Celestial Resonance, and a lot of people have picked this up. That's the sun's movement around, that's what they're orbiting around, not the sun. It's that point in the middle. And the sun is going around it because of the effects of all these bodies whistling around it. So the tighter spiral might be Venus, and the bigger spiral might be Neptune or Saturn, on the same sort of winding. So it's a different way of looking at things. So we're covering a lot of ground here. I don't know if it's making sense or you're keeping up with it, but what we're still interested in is power and how to measure unusual forms of energy. So this is one way of measuring the energy in water. You have what's called an electroscope here, which is just thin foil metal. Might be in a vacuum, but if there's a charge around, it'll come together and open up. It'll flicker. It was the old way of measuring a charge, if you like, before we got multimeters. And what he's using here, actually, to charge the whole thing up is water. So you can take one stream of water and split it into needle-thin jets. That one is linked to that one, and that one is linked to that one. So they create, from one jet, a differential charge. One might be positive, what so-called, one might be negative. But anyway, you get a discharge on that. And he noticed, Schauberger used this. If he used high mountain water, this thing would flicker for 24 hours. If he used his water corpse, he'd be lucky if it worked for half an hour. And what he's looking at is the biodynamic energy in electrical form in water, like it's a huge, amazing battery. So that's worth, if you're interested in it anyway, you can look up Lord Kelvin's thunderstorm experiment. And this is the other thing about this. If you use the water from that, as it's gone through that, if it was flat already and you used it on that and then watered your garden, you get a differential growth rate. Your things will grow better, because plants love electricity. They love charged water. So this is designed by a pal of mine in Australia to generate a differential charge and then squirt the water through it. So that's the spinny thing for your garden sprinkler, and then you get this differential in charge which plants love. And Dan Winter, I don't know if you've heard of him, but he's done a lot of work on this to do with water flows. It's well worth a look to get increased growth rate. So if any of you are in agriculture, have a look at Dan Winter's Imploder, it's called, because he's taken the shapes and generated something which improves agricultural production just by changing the energy in the water, how he's allowing it to spin and what it's doing. And I'll talk a little bit about that with my work in a little while, what I found. So what I've done over the years, I learned how to use 3D CAD, so I started drawing some of the drawings that Schauberger comes up with. So that's my 3D drawing of, because I can get this 3D manufactured now, of this. It's a slight variation, but this is the Biotechnological submarine. I mean, I'm being a guy, I love gadgets. I mean, it's got to be floating or flying or doing something. I don't know if you've ever seen The Hunt for Red October, but in there's the Americans versus the Russians, and the Russians have got this amazing sub and it's coming out, and they're following it, tracking it on sonar, and then they can't see it anymore. They say, where's it gone? And they say, we think it's engaged the tractor drive. Yeah? Tractor drive? What is that? Well, it's this basically. So what you're doing, because in my explorations I found a patent for the American Navy for what's called a tractor drive. I can't find it now. This is about 6 years ago. And basically what you're doing is you're taking water in at the front, you're creating, I better use that one, you can't see that. You're taking water in at the front and you're passing it through plates. And this water that's going down the flanks is moving in spirals, and the water next to you, as you can see here, is going upstream. Spiral, it's going upstream. Next to you, it's going upstream. So that's just like a roller bearing on your bicycle. So that thing is sucking, it's causing a partial vacuum in front. So it's making a hole in which it's falling. It's falling in a hole of its own making. And this idea down here is silent. There's no cavitation. The way they track submarines is when the propeller is whooshing round, at the tips of the blades you get the pressure differential, you get cavitation which forms a bubble which collapses, and when it does it makes a sound like slapping like a wall. It's that loud. And that is all wasted energy, if you like, because it got the shapes wrong. When you get the shapes right, there's no cavitation, so you're silent. Can't hear you. And you're flying through the water. So this is one of the basic shapes to start, which is you've got this lovely wavy plate, and the wavy plate actually is, you've got an expansion zone and a compression zone. Expansion, compression, getting faster as it goes out the end. That's why you call these breathing machines. What he didn't tell you is how fast they're breathing, because they go as they push the water goes through. That alters it. That's to do with low energy nuclear change, and what in fact you do is exchange heat energy for kinetic, and it accelerates out the side and does all this magical thing. So this is based on his ideas to do with a trout, observing a trout in a high mountain stream. I don't know if you ever have looked at trout, but they'll sit on station in a fast flowing stream for hours, quite happily, a little twitch of the tail, and the stream that's coming towards them is a spiral flow which they're riding in, flying in, and all they got to do is open the mouth when something comes along. It's a great way to get fat, you know, he's not doing any work. But the question in his mind is, how are they staying on station? And if you've ever watched a fish, when you scare it, which way does it go? Upstream or downstream? Downstream, upstream. Which way does it go? What's the vote? Downstream? I would have said downstream, because you've got the weight of water and the weight of the fish and gravity. It doesn't, it goes upstream. When it goes upstream, it goes faster than it can go downstream. He did other weird experiments. For example, he got his guys to pour a cauldron of hot water upstream of the fish. As soon as it hit the fish, it was swept off station. It couldn't stay on station when the temperature gradient changed. Figure that one out. But there is a slight explanation I'd share with you on how it's going so fast upstream, and it's not to do with its tail. It's to do with how it moves water through its mouth and gills. So what it does is opens its mouth, closes it and its gills, then pops open its gills. And when it does that, it makes the equivalent of a smoke ring down its flanks. They've got a modern name, they call them solitons. And even in Area 51, they're talking about managing solitons, which are the toroidal energies around certain craft. And then they start to do their magic stuff, which the fish is showing you in the water. See, all our stuff, all our mechanics is looking at the gravitational effects. Nobody is looking at what's going upstream. There's always a resultant, there's always something else to balance energetically. And the bit that's going upstream is what the trout's interested in, and so am I. Because I'd like to be doing a bit of that. So this is where I start to interact with Schauberger's work, because what I did is I built a well, this is an old Coke bottle here, filled with water, and I've got 5 points of injection at the top, so it's spinning. Here's the injectors. So I'm spinning the water, it's going in at a tangent all the way around, so it's spinning the water. And at the bottom we've got a hole. And if I'm lucky, I might be able to run the video, if I can remember where everything is. Is that me? Yeah. So we're just going to run. This is a bit of fun, this is. I had hours of fun with this. Because this is what I was saying earlier, I wanted to interact in some way practically rather than just reading books. Come on.
Just hit return.
Hit return. Enter.
Highlight it and hit, yeah.
Alright. So, that's an egg. This is a chicken's egg. It's a bit big for this hyperbolic. So the inverse of the hyperbolic is the egg, but this egg is probably about 3 times too big, but it's the nearest I could get. And you've got water. It's mounted vertically, and you've got spinning water at the top, and you've got the hyperbolic going down the middle. And you've got a hole at the bottom. That silver thing's a jam pourer, so it's highly technical. This is coming from 1 point of injection from the tap, which I control the velocity with, 5 points of injection. When it's at the right velocity, if that was floating, it would be about ½ an inch above the surface, so it's got positive buoyancy, yet it's going up and down in this vortex. Oh, you know, I'm scratching my head thinking that it shouldn't do that. But what it does is when the water level is level with the injectors, it comes up. When you increase the water level above the injectors, it goes down. And I kind of like this. It's so little things are pinging off in my mind and saying, that's the star drive. That's how we control the injectors from the dilithium crystals, isn't it? It's got to be. That's them long things on Star Trek, isn't it? Mounted horizontal, because they're going that way. So I'm thinking, man, this has got to be how it's done. Anyway, we see something in some of my pictures to do with plasmas, which you wouldn't necessarily first think are in water, but I'll give you some evidence it is. So anyway, it's floating up and down in here. So I'm floating this thing up and down, and I'm having great fun. I spent hours and hours out there, and it froze me butt off one winter. So I've done this experiment for over a couple of years. This is a few years ago, and most people, when they're exploring the vortex and the shape, they put in particles. Sometimes they use dried coffee, but I didn't. I used dyes, and I've got a whole string of videos you can have a look online. They're called Twisted Water Starter, which is hard to forget. If you remember the song, Twisted Fire Starter. But anyway, Twisted Water Starter, and they'll list. So I've had emails from all over the world, and people are going, "Wow, do you know what that means?" I'm saying, "No, what's it mean?" And hopefully they'll tell me. But they don't usually say much after that. You know, "It's amazing. How do you do that?" So I'm just using dyes instead of particles. Now you can see it dancing up and down, lifting off. So you're controlling an energy system using water and buoyancy. And there are other aspects to water which are not even considered, which is subtle energies around them, magnetism, electricity, you might say. But Schauberger didn't call them by those names. He called them bioelectricity, biomagnetism. And that's really how we kind of function. Do I just the X on top? I'll go for that. And see if we can reload our. Minimise that. Now I'm still running, aren't I, on the PowerPoint? Oops, not that one. That one. Is it working? Yeah, it's working. So now I'm doing spinning things myself. So the point I'm making is whatever your interest is, you engage with it in whatever way you can. I mean, Schauberger was around the Second World War. He was in the period of the Second World War. But the Germans, well, let's say the Nazis especially. Forward it through. Okay, the Nazis especially had heard about his work. And I differentiate the Nazis from the German people, because after the Second World War it was only the German country that surrendered. Nazis didn't. So we got loads of, we got Project Paperclip with von Braun and Peenemünde. Peenemünde was all hot energy. There were all the repulsive rockets, the V2s, the V1s, that went on to the rockets that allegedly went to the moon, or at least into orbit. We're all using what's called chemical repulsion. That's the masculine energy. They're shoving loads of stuff out the back in order to go forward. But they also developed other technology through, in the West you might say, or conventionally, we have a box, and we call it physics. And they're full of laws, all kinds of laws in there. The Germans looked at that box, or the Nazis did, and said, "It's not working for us, let's put back in what might work." And they did everything. They looked at the vimanas, they looked in the Himalayas, they looked at Schauberger, they looked at Implosion. They had no resistance to the ideas. They didn't have any laws they had to fulfill. And they also had another group which became known as the Vril, or the Thule Society, which were a little more esoteric, because apparently there was two females who were channeling information from a place called Aldebaran. And from that they got various downloads on how to build various pieces of kit.
Is that the same society that was looking for hollow earth?
Yeah, the hollow earth linked into all kinds of ideas to do with that, yeah. The Argathan ideas, or what might be in the Himalayas. There's all kinds of information which has all kinds of weird distortions for us in the West, but they didn't have a problem, so they would send expeditions to the Himalayas and further afield, because of, I don't know if you know what the vimanas are, but they are in the ancient Indian texts flying around a long time ago. And also there's plenty of evidence in various strata of vitrified sand, that is silica or sand, which is turned to glass. How were they doing that unless they were using very high temperatures? So there's lots of things we've forgotten over time. I mean, sometimes I say these are the ideas in this breathing of society. You mean this has been the only one? What about what was going on in Atlantis? Or what was going on in other places, in the Himalayas, or various technologies? Or there's even stories of, well, I read everything that was weird and wonderful, of monks that when they're in a certain state can cover vast distances. They go on a very special diet, or they just don't eat. And then in a kind of meditation they cover, 50 miles in a day. I loved all that sort of thing. Apparently so did the Nazis, because Schauberger had a 3-hour interview with Hitler, so the story goes, And when he came out, Hitler said, give this man everything he needs to generate what he needs to generate. And he agreed to, well, he didn't have a choice really. They said, well, you either work for us or we hang you, so it's up to you. But he did say, if I'm going to work for you, then I want good conditions for anybody who's working with me. And then we get to a place with some of his technology. One was the Repulsion. We'll probably come on to that. Well, we will come on to it. I'm not sure how time's going. But this is another way of looking at the Earth. This is looking at the Earth in terms of terrestrial biocondenser. A condenser, we use condensers now in our circuits. It gives an instant output of energy rather than waiting for a battery to charge or discharge. We get an instant output from a capacitor. And a capacitor is just a thing that's held apart one from the other with a charge across it, and we usually have them flat or in cylinders, but what he's suggesting here, and so did Tesla, that the whole Earth is a condenser. And if you want to think about it another way, if you have a look at clouds, you know, you get these nice fluffy clouds, but if you look at them from a mountaintop, you never see one down here and another one up there. You might get alto stratus, but all the cumulus clouds, you could draw a line on the bases if it wasn't disappearing over the curvature of the Earth. They're all at the same distance from the Earth, and they say the cloud base is 300 feet, 1,000 feet. Well, what does that mean? Well, it means that one of these layers is altering on the Earth, and they're sitting on that layer. So that's a biocondenser. So in my mind, when I think about this, I mean, he said birds don't fly, they're flown, and I thought that's a weird thing to say. But what they're doing is when they take off from the ground, and insects as well, as soon as they're in the air, because of the friction of the air, just like rubbing electrum or amber with silk, they generate a charge instantly as soon as they're moving in the air. So now they're a charged particle in a condenser, so they're almost floating. That's what he was. That's what, to my mind, that's what he was saying. They were being flown. In fact, they were so buoyant, they're rowing. They're more like they're floating, and they're rowing through this charged area. There's another way of looking at that, which is the ideas of Victor Schauberger, who studied insects for many years, and found some that had anti-gravitational effects. So they were floating, and then they were using their wings to row through the air. And it's one of the explanations, apart from managing vortices, how bumblebees fly. Now we're going a bit ahead of ourselves in some ideas. That's some of the ideas. I mean, I'm interested in anything that will float, just like the Nazis were. So to finish that story, you've got Peenemünde, you've got the Second World War, you've got the big celebration as well being fighting for. We've got the Peenemünde, no more bombs on London, hot rockets. We'll export those to America and build NASA. So they took all the German scientists from Peenemünde, and to my mind that was watch the birdie. They're all hot. Watch the birdie. Meanwhile, we're doing this under here, and we're going to Argentina and Brazil in an electrogravitic craft, which we've partly designed at the Wenceslas mine, along the lines of Schauberger's ideas, the vimanas, and which some of them are diagrammed and explained what they were using. They were using red mercury, and they were spinning mercury in one direction, in one direction, and inside that mercury in the other direction. So you've got two counter-rotating flows on a single axis, and this happens. You start to fly around and float about. So I've no doubt there's lots of pictures showing various so-called UFOs, which is a misnomer because we know what most of them are anyway, floating about, and we were all playing this game while we still get in these tin cans with repulsive rockets to go from A to B. But the other thing about that is you have to pass the port. You have to be controlled and have it stamped so everybody knows where you're going. If you've got a Levity bubble, they absorb all radiation. They're not picked up on radar, so nobody knows where you are or when you've left. And also, if we've all got one, there aren't any boundaries anymore. So what are you going to fight over? So you've got your 3D printer, you've got your 0-point energy, and you've got your flying about stuff. You're pretty much done then, aren't you? You know, you can go anywhere. I mean, if you don't like it here, you fly off to Brazil, which is apparently what they did. That's my thought. So this is watch the birdie, Peenemünde, hot rockets, under the radar over here. And then you got this whole story with Admiral Byrd and his fleet that went down to Antarctica, because allegedly there was some Nazi base down there, He comes back within a few weeks. He's gone down there with aircraft carrier, destroyers, I don't know, about 30 planes, all the kit, loads of men. He's back within a couple of weeks. He's not going back either, and nobody knows why. You know what happened? Oh, it was a bit cold down there, and just came back. He got the shit shot out of him. That's why he came back. You know, he just got absolutely zapped. Anyway, I'm just going to shift the energy a little bit off some of the ideas, because I'm just going to cog in, I'll just call it, with some of my ideas, or what I've been finding out. This is, I've been working with brass. See, one of the things, all my injectors were made of brass. Mainly they were the things I found when I went to the model shop. So I wanted to make injectors, so I started working with brass. And if you remember that thing with the egg floating up and down, that's got brass injectors. And one thing I did, I wanted to measure the electrical change in the running hyperbolic, because I was told there's thousands of volts. So I shorted them all out on the top, and then I was trying to measure it with the meter. I got 0 results, I'm afraid to say, but I was using the right kit. But anyway, I let the brass strip stay on the top, and I went back a few days later, and there's this beautiful, amazing pattern like sand dunes on this sheet of brass. And I think, where on earth has that come from? You know, I can't think what it's doing up there. But basically, if you run water onto brass, it'll take a picture of it. So if you run it for 5 days, this was horizontal, i.e. that way, and a lot smaller than that, you get that. Which I've checked out.
Up, please.
You what?
Lift it up.
Lift it up. My beautiful young assistant.
Round 3.
You take your top off. That's rude, those.
You'll have to pay for that.
And just some research been doing recently, we find out that I forgot the researcher's name, might come to me, but anyway, this is a layout of Atlantis, because things work by weird resonance when you start to plug in. That outer wall is called brass, so it's covered in brass, and this inner wall is made of tin. Now, brass is made of 2 things. It's an alloy of copper and tin, and in the middle, orichalcum is the Greek name for brass. So why don't they call that brass? The other thing is the colour's different. So, you know, I've been looking at things and thinking about it, and I was looking at Dr. Champion's work, low energy nuclear change, where he's heating up copper, then hitting it with microwaves, and it turns into gold. I don't know, that's a good trick. Anyway, if you want to look it up, Dr. Champion, low energy nuclear change. I haven't seen it on the BBC. I would have thought it might be up there, really, because it is a bit of news, isn't it? No, we just get a bit of football. And, you know, it's...
Where could we find it if the BBC for some reason doesn't say it?
We could. Yeah, they could be here, but anyway, we're here for whatever reason. Anyway, I'm just looking at anything that resonates with various ideas, because to me, with the way this is the land that comes out from the centre, Atlantis. This is actually a covered canal and a bridge, then some land, then another bridge over another canal, and they do different things. Well, if that's not a circuit, I'll eat my hat. So we'll have to build this. So I've only been looking at this for a week.
Where did you get that picture from?
That's from, he lives in Cambridge. He's really well known. He's written loads of books. I was trying to think of his name. I can't remember it. But he's, you know, he's looked at all the megaliths, and he's given talks. Who? No, it's not him. Anyways, well, no, I can't remember the name. I'll come to him. But I've been looking at this. See, the way I figure things is, whatever you call your physics, your chemistry, and your measuring systems are the wake of a boat of discovery. As you discover new things, so-called, like Schauberger, you get a different set of measuring systems. But the establishment don't want to change their measuring systems because they think they're measuring what is real and is repeatable. But the point about it is the measuring system is the wake of a ship, and the wake does not push the boat. So all of us discover things in our worlds and our lives which others may not measure. Doesn't mean to say they're not real. So that's when they say, oh, it's only real if it's if you're published and it's been peer reviewed, so everybody else understands it. Well, if some people are so far in front, it's a bit tricky to do that. Doesn't mean to say what they discovered is not real. Because you've got Coral Castle, Edward Leeds Scallon, and even now that's a mystery how he's moving those rocks around. That's all well documented. How is this stuff working? So what I'm doing is I sort of look at this and I think, oh, I didn't know that. The outer wall was an outer wall of stone, of one material, and then that wall is made of brass. Well, I'm working with brass. And I just look for similarities, and, you know, it looks like an eye to me. So, I go with it. I'm not resisting those ideas. Have a look. So that's one sort of relationship, because that sheet, I tried everything with water once I'd seen this, and nothing else works. Aluminium sheets don't work, bronze sheets don't work, even gold leaf doesn't work, silver doesn't work, pewter doesn't work, only brass. And when you look at the shape of it that's in there, the water was falling in that blank spot in the middle. That is polished brass. It's unwritten data. Around it it's all happening, and then there's nothing in the middle. And at one corner, I think it's this top right corner, for you, top left you're looking at on this. This is very intriguing. That is where his right hand is here. If you've got a plasma ball at home, you'll notice exactly the same sort of shapes. So that's where the water was hitting, spinning down. The water always spins. It always spins. So if you let a pencil thin stream go, it'll be spinning. We'll see that later. So up at that corner here, right, I think they've got the gist. There might be some pictures as well. So if it's doing all that, it wasn't a perfect position. There was a rock or a bit of moss in the corners, hence the other disturbance. It only writes data if it's spiraling, if it's spinning. Higher the spin rate, higher the colour. So you get high spin rate, get these high colours or the purples. Lower spin rate, you get the sort of sandier colours. When you see it in another form, which we will, they're the same colour separation you get when you heat treat steel. So they take it to a certain temperature and quench it, and that gives you a certain hardness to the metal. So when I showed one of the early pictures I did, which is called the feather, which will probably come up, to a metallurgist friend of mine. Actually he makes suits of armour, so he knows about metal and temperature. He said, how did you do this? How can you do this? It's got to be done with a gas jet or a flame. I said, no, it's all done cold. It's done with water. And he was still scratching his head, because how can you do that? Unless you realise that in fact fire or heat is a kind of electricity, seeing as we live in an electrical universe. So what burns you is the electrical discharge. We call that heat, because our bodies know it's going to damage us. We've just given it a label heat, but it's electrical discharge or transfer that will burn us. So you get the same burn from an electric burn as you do from the fire. Slightly different the way it works, but the same sort of response in the body. Anyway, one thing we did was we wanted to take brass and have a look at a real close-up, so we took it to the scanning electron microscope at Leeds. And this is just one picture. The one on that side is from the brass. That's just a human hair at the same magnification to get an idea of what you might be looking at, because I wanted to see what was bending the light to make the colours. Because there's no dye in there. I haven't painted it, nothing. It's just by refraction through. There must be crystals on the surface. Oh, I got better results on my microscope at home at 30 magnification. And on the layer of the brass there's a deposit which is like calcites, and there's also little flecks of gold which looks promising. Think of low energy nuclear change, could be onto something here. So you're talking about being able to grow things from water that are already in the water. That's kind of intriguing. And he's again looking at the eye Atlantis. This is one of the early pictures I did, and this is the outflow from the bottom of the vortex. So when the vortex comes out and it's done its spinny thing, goes through that little hole, it spreads out in a little cone, and that's the picture it made. It looks like the negative, well, that's in black and white, of something else. And here's another one which I called eclipse, because it looked like an energetic eclipse. There's two patterns. There's a main one there and there's another one there. And that might be just because it wandered about a bit, because it was flapping in the breeze on the back wall. It's not a perfect experiment. But there are other things in there, other shapes, and it's kind of mind-blowing. This is the same picture you've just been looking at, just in black and white, just to see some I called it Eye of the Storm because that was what it looked like. But in the hurricane, you can see a definite spiral. And this one does, but it stops there. That goes that way, that goes that way, as if it's moving that way, but the water just hit here. So there's loads of anomalies I haven't figured out. So I've been asking brains around Manchester, Leeds universities, and not heard a darn thing. In fact, when we went there to do this, I was asking the PhDers, have you ever seen anything like this? Do you know what it is? I said, no, I haven't got a clue. That's all I got. Gave me a few emails, but over the next 2 weeks, there was about, I suppose, total, there must have been about 200 hits from Leeds and Manchester University on my website. So they're obviously thinking, what is this? I haven't seen this. Where's this come from? You know, what is it? But they're not asking me, or they're not engaging with me as yet. And this is what I mean by, I'm quite keen on this idea of plasma discharges. But how do you get that from water? You know, if somebody was describing it, it's, that's impossible. But there it is. And you've got the three of them together like an evolution. Because this is the most recent one. That's very early days and a real crappy camera. In fact, early days, I used to do the pictures and polish the brasses and use them again, because they were too expensive to buy. But we've got about 100 original brasses now with different patterns on. And while I was cleaning the brasses, I used Brasso, and it makes this horrible black grey gunge on your surface. And while I was doing that, I just stuck that under a stream of water from the tap. And from one stream of water you get the bifurcation, or the two, and they're both spinning the same way, but they don't like each other. They're not mixing, they're not joining. And I thought they just joined together, back together. No, they don't. If they're spinning, they're doing their thing. So now you get a change or a bifurcation that came from one stream. Don't forget, one stream, and now you've got two. That's magic, isn't it? Oh, I think it's magic. And it also, if you put a line across there, it just reminds me of the top of the Ankh. I don't know what that means, but it's worth sticking in there. You never know. And there's the feather. That's the original one. One of the early ones I did on a sheet of brass foil. This was many moons ago, which actually turns into, which is turned into another picture now, which is called Merlin. Because on this, I don't know what it shows on that one actually. How good is it? On the first one, when I did it, that's a clothes peg. That's about 1 millimetre. Tiny jet, high pressure and mains pressure from the tap. I see this little character up there, I think it's Yoda with a whip, you know. So it's like, oh, well, that's a bit of energy, I wonder what he's doing up there. And then somebody rotated the picture that way, and now we've got, it was he. He's got two eyes, and he looks like he's got his hands together on his sword. So he became known as Merlin, because inside here is another hooded figure, a little bit darker. So he got the two Merlins, so he became known as Merlin. And so the Eye of the Storm that you see in front of this one are like the bookends of various experiences I've had over the years, and many hours spent on the peaks. You'll see some of the pictures in a minute. You know, tell me, I don't know how they come out. That one, this was done, this is a ring magnet, a ferrous ring magnet that used to hold an antenna on your roof for your CB radio, so it's about that far across. And I wanted to see if the water changed due to the magnetic field. I couldn't see any change, I just got the flows under the magnet as if it didn't have one. So that was intriguing, and there's another one similar. On these journeys from this, the next one, so I was looking for places to place brasses, and there's a place by a road in the Peak District which looks like a shrine, so I called it the shrine. That's, you know, to identify it. One's Jake Stream, the waterfall, the cage, the shrine, and my partner and I know where all these places are to, you know, put these things, and so they came. So there's hundreds of pictures from these different ones. Some of them are close-ups, but that's one from, that was water dripping on it at an angle, and it might have moved, or the water levels changed over time, so you'll have different colours. But I think it's tomorrow I'm going to get a much better screen, an LED screen, so you'll be able to see these in this vivid colour as that one in the front, and they're absolutely to me they're mind-blowing. Don't forget, these are just done with water and brass, and an expensive camera and macro lens, a few hours of work. So these are other images, they don't show too well, but just as an illustration about flows and what we call turbulence in your bodies. This is really to do with how fluids move. They say your heart's a pump. I mean, that's a general accepted term. And the pump sounds very masculine to me. It's like you're doing that, bump, bump. But you've got 20,000 miles average of capillaries. And you know what they're like? They're thinner than a hair in your body. So, and you've got a viscous fluid. How are you going to push it down 20,000 miles of capillaries? Yeah, it's just not going to do that. Also, if it was working like a pump, the bottom of your heart is paper thin. It's like that thin. So the pressure needed to move it even distance of this field would be like knocking a piston into a tube 2 inches, you know, with a great big hammer to get it even to move. So it can't be working like a pump. Can't, it's impossible. If you want to find out how it's really working, then have a look at the work of Frank Chester, because he'll explain it to you. But I was interested in laminar flows because I thought if there's any turbulence in the body, how is it going to overcome it? And I came to a realization that if your body's healthy, there are no turbulent flows in your body. You've got other means of moving, or fluids moving, like a temperature gradient, but it's not doing it like a pump, it's more like a diode. So when it comes in the right ventricle, it's actually slowed down by the shape, and out the left ventricle, it's flung out like the potter's wheel, so it's goes slowing down and speeding up, slowing down, speeding up, lubbed up, lubbed up, lubbed up, and that's how it's doing. It's not a pump. It's working on the feminine principles, not the masculine principles of push. It's working on suction and acceleration. It's working centripetally, and that kind of resonates with me because you've got two opposite flows almost on the same axis. And if you remember about the Nazi bell, it was called, they've got two opposite flows on the same axis. It's very difficult to do in nature, but the heart is about as close as you can get. So we should be able to fly, I reckon. Anyway, just to illustrate this one on the left is a laminar flow. That means it was in a flowing stream, and it was smooth, no turbulence, just flowing over it nicely. There was a little bit of turbulence down this side where it touched a rock or a bit of moss, but nice laminar flow. This side has got all this amazing colour and geometry. That's turbulent flow. That's the inside walls of your blood vessels. The only time it turns into anything like that is under two conditions. That's due to injury or disease. All the rest of the time, the inside, if you could take a picture, would keep blue. If it was in brass, if you were made of brass, all the inside of your vessels would be this high frequency blue colour, because there's no resistance to the flow. It's a frictionless machine, and it's also working with the electrical, well, it's a saline solution and iron, because we've got iron based blood, and so it's floating around your bloodstream more than being pushed. There's no resistance to the flow is what I'm saying. Obviously when you get resistance and things like that, you get gout and things like that, or an injury. These are some of the other pictures I've made, and like I said, if you come tomorrow I will show you these in full living colour. But you know, you can't help but ask yourself, well, you know, some things in there, how'd they get in there? How's water making that? This is called interdimensional capsule because of this baby in here, and this looks like a capsule, and these colours are, when you see them, are absolutely vivid. They're brilliant. That one shows up better. So this is the base of one of the shrines, so that would be the equivalent of about that size in real life, about a square inch. So it's blown up with a macro lens. So I'm just showing you some of these colours and designs and shapes. In fact, nearly everything I've seen in the living world, I've seen in these pictures, from nebula to small creatures, are created by the shapes in water, to take as a bit of a hint. And so end that section with the eye of the storm. And I mean, you don't always want to blow your own trumpet, but I haven't found anything like this on the planet. This is a new discovery. All the brains of the boffins don't know what it is, so this is new on the planet, and I like that. So that's another picture. That's water. Looks like a planetoid.
Yeah, looks like the Earth.
Looks like the Earth. That looks like writing. That's from Jake's stream and a rock.
That's teeth.
Teeth. That's the top of one of the shrines. Ultra close up.
Saturn's rings.
Saturn's rings. Yeah, they're all in there. I keep looking at them. That looks familiar. What's that doing on there? So there's loads of different shapes and geometries. I mean, this is not really doing it justice, but when you see them on the screen, which will run sometime tomorrow, you'll get a better impression of what they look like. They look like abstract, they look like impressionist pictures, they look like, I don't know.
That's drowning.
Is that drowning?
Yeah, you're under the water and you can see the sun.
Oh, I sure like that. Thanks for sharing.
That's right, no problem.
Is that an old image, is it?
No, that happened to me when I was 2.
Oh, right.
Yeah, but it was a bit more green.
A bit more greener, yeah, it is a particular green. Are we back to the kudu horn? How are we doing for time? Anybody who's timing this?
Here he comes.
How long have we got then?
Here's your...
I think everyone would stay in here for the rest of their lives, to be honest.
so we float out.
We've got about another 15 minutes.
Well, we'll slow down, but I just wanted to show you this is one of the machines that Schauberger developed. He developed a Repulsion. This is his home power generator, and what he's got is a load of kudu horn shapes spiraling out, and it's sucked up and it goes out. Once it's started, it runs by itself. In fact, you have to slow it down. In order to slow it down, you stick on a generator on the bottom. So that runs by itself. That is running on the spiral shapes, the planetary motion, orbit and spin. So he understood this in a profound way.
That's in water, is it?
That'll be running in water. Now the thing about it, you might have to run that for a while till it conditions the water and also the field around the object. And once that's established, then it'll self-run. So if you want to kick something off, like you've built it and it's not working, keep at it until it's established its energy field, and then it'll work. Now this is a Repulsion, just to say that 20 centimetre disc spinning at 20,000 RPM, its levitational force is 228 tons, because above it, it's got an expanding hurricane, and it's going. So this one sheared 6 bolts and disappeared. Well, the shear on 6 bolts is about a ton per bolt, and it sheared 6. I pulled them out. It was gone through the roof. These are just some of the other shapes. This is a nice shape because this is not a pushing force. This is an introductory force, if you want to call it a force, an introduction of the scoop to the water. So it's like moving a spoon this way through the water, in which it falls into. You're not pushing it. You're not saying, get in here. You're saying, would you like to fall into this spoon, and it starts to spin. You know, that's a nice introduction, and then it sucks its way forward. So these ways of moving things are vast. They're so powerful. I just want to finish on this because this was the empirical test of a bunch of pipes that Schauberger delivered to Stuttgart University in about 1955 under Professor Franz Poppel, who was the professor of hygiene, but obviously had the qualifications. He did the test, and they were testing the flow rates through these different pipes, through a glass pipe, through a copper pipe, through twisted, and through the one in the middle, which is our favourite, the kudu shape. So this last bit, that's the graph from the glass. As the flow rate goes up, the resistance increases on here. So more flow, more resistance, more flow, more resistance, a nice straight line graph, as you'd expect. This one's a bit wobbly, and this is what's called the start of the unwinding flow. There's the other pipes doing weird stuff, but this beauty, guess which one that is? So when it's here, it's got more resistance than the glass pipe. But when it gets to here, the amount of resistance at that flow rate is dropping. And when Poppel got to here, he didn't want to know about that because he had to think of a term. I don't know what to call it. I'll call it negative friction. What? What's negative friction? Because all the rest, you know, he's showing an increase and decrease in the resistance in the pipe with increasing flow rate. So that's the nice graph. That's the glass pipe. As the water rate goes up in, you know, so many millilitres per second, you get a nice straight line resistance. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. That's lovely. We like that. Happy with that. On the spiral helicoid, so-called, goes up, goes down. He's worried. He's probably run this a few dozen times, but here he's really crapping himself because at that flow rate, that's saying 7. That's saying 0. It's saying 2 zeros because it drops below 0 and then comes back up again to 0. What does that mean? I think that means a little touch of 0 point. Shh, don't tell anyone. Don't tell anyone. It's at that point. If you're going to design your machines, design it around that point there. Because at that point there, it is producing energy from the vacuum. I'll have a touch of 0 point, everybody. Oh yeah, I just wanted to you might have to hand these around, but I was just going to show this. This is a magnetite. That is a felt tip pen, highly technical. It's a 2p. These are neodymium magnets, but if you just lift this off, doing, that's nice, that's nice. And this other one, which you'll have to hand round, I mean, that's obviously, it's two just opposing forces, so it's easy to explain. You can have a look at it. You take the lid off that, give it a wobble and hand it round. Don't lose the thing inside it. It's about 50 quid's worth, but give it a little wobble and have a look. Just float it around slowly, slowly, slowly. It's floating. There's no moving parts, just magnets and paramagnetic pyrolytic graphite. So it just transmits electricity. I mean, these are just things I've just, you know, you can buy them off the internet. You put them together yourself. And I've got another piece of kit. Where have I done that? A sort of red hoop with a spirally thing on.
On the back of your chair.
Oh, can't see it. I like this one. I got a couple of questions. It does show some lovely shapes, but the reason I like it is because of two things. One is the shapes, but what I want you to do before I let you go, this is to do with expectations and what you think you know. A bit like science. We only know this because we think we know it. So I want you to guess in your heads what's going to happen when I let go of those coils. This is going to show. It could be. There's one. There's
What are they made of?
This is a loop of stainless steel.
I know the answer.
Do you? Well, what we're doing is an experiment with your little noodles. What you expect to happen? Obviously, I know the answer, so I'm the clever one. So we'll let go of these, and it does that. Ooh. Ooh. And then it spins. And this is called a Torus fluxus, and the maths for this was developed in the 95. When it does that, it turns into this little bubble of energy, with lovely spirally stuff going on. Outside winding into the inside, it's imploding down this route.
Still falling.
Anybody want to play with that?
Yeah.
Yay!
Not really. Just roughly.
Just spin it round, keep it so it's only round. So, there's a little floaty thing that you're going to see with no moving parts, and then it's just, you know, out the rabbit's hut, floated a little magnet. So the question I've got for you, what can you do with an unlimited budget, some of the best brains in the world, and 60 years? Do you think we could sort of float off somewhere? And if you did manage that, and
Maybe they have already.
Olé! I've just been saying that. The Nazis did that while you're watching the
They're
hot
on the dark
rockets.
side
They've
of
already
the
done
moon,
it.
aren't they?
They're not going to share it with you.
That's right.
They're not going to share it with you lot. Floaty about stuff. No, they want you in your hot jets flying over there. Bit of deadly orgone and passport control.
The Merkaba there instead.
Anyway, that's my theory, you know, so I like a bit of drama. But if you wondered what was happening about the Second World War, it's got nothing to do with who wins the war. Fuck all to do with that. In fact, we know the same banks paid for both sides to do their stuff. Meantime, bit of electrogravitic over here. Just think about it. If I can do that in 2 seconds, what can they do with 60 years and an unlimited budget they call the black budget? Millions and trillions. You're going to try anything you want. And some of the best brains. And then, of course, they're going to publish it all because it's your money. They're going to tell you and share with you all this wonderful physics. Whoever they are. Dun, 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 dun. Well, if you want to know more about it, you can just look at... well, Kerry was here yesterday and she interviewed Michael Schratt, who did Project Blue Book, I think it was called. He called it Blue Book, not Blue Beam, that's something else. But and he's detailed all the planes that do wonderful stuff in the skies around us, apparently. And he gets to the electrogravitic side later on in the book, charging the front end of the craft and a different charge on the back, and it turns out they switch the engines off.
Oh,
Have a look.
not that far.
Project Blue Book. Anyway, she's done the interview. It's on Project Camelot. Well, I'm sure they can. I mean, the point is, it's getting over this hump that you've got to be burning a fuel in order to do something. Nature's got all this load spinning through space and everything happening on the planet with no moving parts. I can't see any big piston engine driving it.
But those elite guys aren't in harmony with nature, though, are they?
No.
They're
Oh well, I don't know what they're in
gone wrong.
harmony with. You know.
Wrong
They're,
psychopaths.
yeah. Yeah. Psychopaths.
They've blown themselves up one day.
Or are you with them? Who knows? Anyway, there's a bunch of ideas to do with.
They're not in harmony. They've got the technology. We're the ones.
No, but they're psychologically behind.
I promised you Cymatics. There it is. Anyway, sorry, I'm being silly. Can't help it. But we got. I just want to finish off now. But the other way of looking at things is drop a pebble in the pond, and this took me ages to get my brain around. So I'm going to share it with you because it'd be like chewing. It'd be like yoga for the mind. In this condition, the wave moves through the water. In this condition, the water moves through the wave. And you get different effects from the same material depending on what you're doing. So if you're doing magical stuff, you either rotate your object through a field, or you have that stationary and rotate a field through the object, which is easier to do. Well, you see, a moving field apparently has no mass, so that's easy to do. So you can get this lot ringing without moving it.
Or sit still and move space.
Zzz, exactly. That's right. Depends how you think about things. And Schauberger, Tesla and Keeley were talking about the same thing. They said you've got to think from the octave above. So you ain't going to get much if you just, you know, I don't know, watching EastEnders. But if you start applying your mind and asking questions, then you might, and you engage with it, then you'll get something else. And the thing is about, what I've noticed about water is it recognizes itself. Otherwise, one stream of water is generating enough charge to do all that. Well, it ain't any batteries, so where's it getting it from? And the reason we call it electricity is because it comes from fossilized amber, which was called electrum. And when it was rubbed with silk, it generated a static charge. And that was our first intro, if you like, in this breathing of civilization, as I often say, to electricity. And what the water is doing, so you can put electric field through electric field, you won't get a resultant, they won't notice each other. Same with magnets. They won't recognize the fields of each other or recognize a magnet. And the water is recognizing itself. It is recogging with itself like electrum and silk to generate the charge. That's what I think anyway. It's kind of weird. Anyway, we've got to end. You know, we've got loads more I could tell you.
Hold the applause. We can just keep going. It was only I was going to give 20 minutes for people to ask like.
Yeah, well, they can if they want to keep going. Go after that.
But should we make John just keep going?
Yeah.
For another unlimited period of time.
Well,
I was going to give you a bladder break.
yeah. Well, I'll have a drink of water in a minute. So I'm bringing in different ideas now because we're looking at resonance. That's a point of impact on the surface of the water there. And if that was spherical, the kind of pattern it would make would be this. So you've got an impact or a ringing. You've got something that's ringing because you've got nodes and antinodes. An antinode is a stretch, a node is where it comes together. So a violin string or a guitar string will have a point where it's not apparently wobbling and then it'll go big and it goes like twanging elastic band. So you've got nodes and antinodes. Well, when it's on a sphere, it does that. You've got places of compression and expansion. And a guy called Alexander Putney's been looking at this, and he calls it infrasound, because when you resonate the skin, that's the earth, it gets nodes and antinodes. And the cause of that resonance is what Tesla identified by the lightning strikes. It's always being hit. Just because there's no lightning here doesn't mean to say it's not anywhere else. He reckoned about 10,000 strikes a minute. It's a huge number, so it's always ringing. As it's always ringing, you're getting expansion and compression. And one of the ideas he's come up with, which is phenomenal and very appropriate, is that point is Giza. So right in the middle of that is one of these, which you can't see, can you? Not very well. So you've got the waves coming in and being transduced by the pyramids. Ding, ding. All these infrasound, he calls them all kinds of waves. He's moved on to other ideas to do with the bowls around the pyramids, which were on nodal points and which rang. I don't know if you know about piezoelectricity. Do you know what piezoelectricity is? Anybody?
Nope.
basically if you compress a crystal,
Yeah.
you get an electrical discharge.
Yeah.
And if you put electrical current into a crystal, it'll change shape, so it does one thing or the other.
Yes,
So if you've got compression points, and say something's changing with your sun, that's altering the frequency that the pyramids are transducing, some are going to get more intense and less intense. They're still going to be in the same place. But if under this spot you've got 3 cubic miles of granite, that's one heck of a lot of piezoelectricity. And the thing is, what are the effects that are going to be taking place above that? So we've got some of the ideas. That's the Giza pyramid on the main nodal point. I mean, it was multifunctional. Obviously, it's not just doing this. But out in the Midwest, in the leafy hills, they found this rock, and that rock is as big as this screen, or bigger, and they reckon it weighs in excess of 2 tons. So it's a bit of a mystery to people. So it must have been dropped there by helicopter. But how would they get all the wires past the branches, and who would bother? Oh, it must have been a flood. Well, it was a flood that was big enough to move a rock there. Why are the trees still standing? So how did the rock get in the branches?
The tree didn't grow its way up there.
No, trees don't grow like that.
No,
If they have a weight on them, they'll grow around it. If you knock a nail in a tree 1 year, in 50 years the nail will be in the same place covered by wood. It won't go up with the tree.
Yeah.
The rock's grown there.
The rock's grown there.
Over a period of deposits over hundreds and thousands of years, the
Yeah.
trees
Someone with a helicopter was taking photos.
Well, apparently it floated there. Apparently it floated on another river of energy. There's all sorts of things you can get into with these. Another one is Stan Tennant's work to do with the original energy that we used to use, which was in our words. So if you get the frequencies right and the tones right, then you can do all sorts of amazing things, which we've long since forgotten.
Like in June.
Yeah, like in June, the aha, crack, doom. Yeah, it was a nice echo of that. It's basically what he's talking about. He's using one shape, which is a thing that wraps around the thumb and goes up the fingers. Interestingly, when you look at the shadows of that and different orientations, you get the letters of the Hebrew alphabet. And that's showing you the vortex, which is the heterodyning effect that Dan Winter's talking about, because he worked with Stan in early days, so their spin-offs, if you like, are very similar. But that's showing you energy language, which if we used it in the right tonal way, we would alter things. Let's put it that way. That's the way I think about it. It's an energy. Our voices and our thoughts are an energy. We just got so used to it, we've forgotten it. Remember, we've forgotten the best language to do it. And I skipped over Cymatics or Cymatics, but that early days you'd put sand on a drum and tone to it, and you get some of the universal mandalas from the human voice. So it tells you it's a fractal universe of which we're a part, and if you know how to adjust it, then you get other effects.
Who's this John Castle you were saying about moving rocks?
Coral Castle.
Okay.
That was Edward Lead Scalnin, or Led Scalnin. He was from middle Europe. I've forgotten which country he was from. Can't remember now. But he weighed about 8.5 stone, and he was moving blocks that weighed 50 tons.
By himself at night.
Sometimes it was at night. One of the famous stories is he had to move the lot. A guy came to pick up some of the rocks on a flatbed, and he said, "Go and have your lunch, and when you come back, I'll have it loaded." And there was a lot of rock, there was tons of rock. And the guy forgot something, so he'd walked a couple hundred yards down the road. When he came back, the wagon was loaded.
Do you mean small rocks or one big rock?
Big rocks.
And did he never do it when anyone was watching?
Yeah.
Kind of. I don't suppose he wanted people to know necessarily. I don't know.
Castle.
Just put Coral Castle, Edward Lead Scalin, and you'll find some of the history of it.
There's a nice documentary
In
on it.
Florida.
Yeah. There's various stories of various people. There's J. Worrell Keeley, who was flying about. That's sympathetic vibratory physics, which has been taken over really by Dale Pond, using some very well. Tesla said if man knew the power in 3, 6, and 9, he'd be able to do anything, shift anything. It's to do with frequencies and tones. Tesla was talking about floating about. He said we could go pole to pole in a matter of minutes. So I don't see why you can't go from here to see your folks in New Zealand in a couple of hours. Now, are you saying, John, have you got one parked outside? Well, actually, no, I don't. But if I did have one, I probably wouldn't tell you, for good reasons, but I don't have one. But if you're going to get something, then you talk about it. You introduce the idea as a possibility. So when we've all got one, we'll all meet on the west coast of Hawaii, on that lovely beach there, 7 o'clock local time. First one there lights the fire, yeah? We'll have a festy over there. So at least we're introducing the potential for the idea. Then we'll work backwards from that to get the technology. All those in favour say aye? Aye. Wow! Like it! Like it! This is just another illustration of the hyperbolic to get the shape. You've got one string vibrating. Now it's vibrating at 2, so you've got 2. And when you do this in a nice way, if you put these marks anywhere else, it doesn't work. You won't get these nice little wavy bits. And what you get is a hyperbolic. So there's another hint. So whatever we build is going to have a hyperbolic in it.
Well, if you look at that as being sound, each one is an
Octave above.
higher. Yeah.
The octave above, that's right. So you change your frequency in whatever way, whether it's sound or something else, or you change your functioning frequency and think from the octave above. Now what would that be like? I don't think there'd be any books involved. Because Schauberger also said when he got his best information, he allowed what he called his consciousness to go with the water. And when it came back, it had loads of sort of information. Now, we're compressing time in a talk. That might have taken him 10 years. So he'd have done it several times, like a meditation, if you want to call it that. An altered state of consciousness, who cares? An exploration with ideas. Or he allowed his consciousness to enter whatever nature is, in particular to do with water, and when it came back he had this extra information, other facets on his diamond. No, I think this is the only reality. This is it. This is all we've got. Solid. We know where we stand. But I think he did other things, and the other thinkers have had similar experiences. They don't write about them because they're much too esoteric, but they've had altered whatever, maybe, you know, as I sometimes say, maybe they were dropped on their heads when they were little, near-death experience, I don't know. But something odd happened to them because they're not writing PhD papers. They're not like mechanistic. They're talking about these unusual things. There's still plenty of unusual people around. There's Hutchinson in Canada, and it's called the Hutchinson effect, and he's got things floating around, he's got things disintegrating cold, bars of metal bending, no heat. All kinds of people doing it. Disappearing, yeah.
Somebody.
Yeah.
I want it!
Have you seen the portaloos?
Where's Mummy?
Hello.
Oh no. Suck, you have to make an effort to restrain the child when in the face of a large speaker.
It's all about the whole pedagogy argument about education, is it?
Yeah.
Base level.
Yeah, base. Yeah, you won't go searching if you haven't been given any tools, unless you're very fortunate. Like you bump into something, you know, or a book, a person, an idea. This is one of my favourite pictures. As you can see, weather balloon, weather balloon, weather balloon, swamp gas, weather balloon, weather balloon, weather balloon, weather balloon. There's nothing to see. Move along, move along. There's an interesting aspect. People talk about seeing lights in the sky that change colour. And Grebennikov, when he was doing his experiments with the gravitational management, when he was observed from the ground, they couldn't see him as, you know, standing on a platform. It was only a small platform, which you might see in a minute. They saw him as a point of light, because the relationship to the electrogravitic field that we call visual vision is altered by his movement. So some of these objects we see moving are different colours because they're either coming towards us, moving away from us, or accelerating. They all look different from the ground. But when you see an object which is doing a very sharp right angle turn, when there's lots of NASA film which is quite well known, where we're seeing these objects in space, the tether is an interesting one, because they sent a tether. We're doing an experiment with a tether a mile long. There's all this stuff floating around, tons of it. Anyway, if they're seeing them going one direction, then 90 degrees, it doesn't mean to say they're all plastered 1 millimeter thick up the wall of their spacecraft. It's because they have their own gravity with them. The Earth has its, and we're sticking on it. They have theirs, and they're in theirs. It's just not the Earth's. So whatever they're doing is in their gravitational field. So they're not going up the side wall with the acceleration and the G-forces, because there aren't any for them. There's all kinds of weird time and distortions and all of that. And so I think it's been going on for ages. There's no such thing as a UFO. We know what they all are. We know electrogravitic craft or whatever they, whichever way they're working. And this is one of my favourite picks as well, and I keep saying that. But the Hannibal Vril Society Blavatsky, Vimanas, and there they are flying around down in Antarctica. That's quite a famous artistic impression. But there was a lot of that for the Second World War. There's loads of kit moved in very large submarines, all kinds of places. There's another design for an engine which is based on suction. You're more interested in what's going upstream of the engine than what's coming out here. They're working on this, which is again the feminine principle. The faster you go, the more suction, the less resistance, the faster you go. You've got to slow the bloody thing down or throttle back. Rather than keep putting more fuel in, you've got to figure out a way to slow the bloody thing down, the absolute polar opposite of what we're doing. As I said, these are quite available online. Just punch in Vimanas, you get the schematic. You can build one yourself probably. This is to do with low energy nuclear change, which is another well hidden thing which I think nature does all the time. I don't think there's a finite amount of gold or oil. I think she regenerates oil and all kinds of minerals naturally. There's done experiments with chicken eggs and denied them for a long period calcium, and they're still making shells. So what are they making them out of? Where are they getting the calcium from? Unless they've got some means to do low energy nuclear change, which is also denied in our everyday science, because that's quite a magical way of making stuff, using very low energy rather than very high pressures and high energies. They're using very low energies, and it's the way nature does things. And you can probably, there's a guy, I've forgotten his name, it's to do with the white powder of gold. He's American. Monoatomic gold and certain effects, Kuftu, bread of heaven, it's known by many names, which you ingest and maybe get a different relationship to all that is. But it has some very weird properties, because when they've made it and they try to weigh it either weighs nothing, it disappears. It's very tricky stuff to weigh,
It's when you heat it up, isn't it?
Yeah, when you alter it, I mean, if you think about it, you shouldn't do that, but obviously it is, so it's got nothing to do with what I think it should be doing. It's still bloody doing it. And then that shifts your whole relationship to what physics are if you've got one anomaly.
Have you got any free energy machines?
The nearest I've got is working with Bedini's, the Bedini schoolgirl motor, which has been quite interesting, and I've had great fun with that. But really, I think it's a teaching tool.
Is that a wheel?
Yeah, it's a wheel with magnets on it. It's around. You can look it up, Bedini schoolgirl motor. Otherwise, I've just been watching nature. Here he is. I told you, it's true. There he is. There's a photo with his shadow. You can look this up online. Right next to the platform. There's his shadow. Doesn't show it in very good resolution, but he's flying, and he's using. He calls it CSE, cavity effect, which is how you resonate sound in a material in a cavity, which allows you to float, which is what the beetles are doing. Because on the carapace of the beetle, flying beetle, it has this hard shield to protect its wings, and it's called a carapace. And at the root of that there are various structures, microstructures, and also the carapace is made of a dielectric which is called chitin. Nature has two plastics, chitin and cellulose. Chitin, crabs, insects, variations of exoskeletons based on that. So he's nicked a bunch and stuck them on his little platform, and he's opened them out, and then he has one throttle opens them out and you get the levitation effect, another one tilts them and he goes forward. So that's why he's got two throttles, if you like, on his platform. Look him up, it's great fun reading about Grebennikov. We're just skipping through ideas now. This is, I was talking about Dan Winter earlier. This is his imploder nozzle, based on the icosahedron flows, and it's a coherent flow. So if you've got crappy water, and you put it in at the top, it spins around this object and comes out kind of mixed nice. It's smooth, it's softer, it's nicer, it's energized, and it's based on, when you look at it from above, this pattern, this rose-like pattern, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, a bit like Venus. It's a pattern through space relative to us, and he calls it heterodyning. That means all the frequencies come together. So anything that's a bit wobbly, it's all come together in that one unit. So they're getting amazing results with growing food from this, and also from seeds that have been left in pyramids and things like that, and then you water them with this flow. You get these amazing effects. It links in a lot of it with the Rodin maths. I don't know if you know about Marco Rodin and the Rodin coil, which is a doubling frequency, but I won't go into it too much because it's a bit techy, but it'll tell you about it. It's doubling frequency, 1 doubled 2, 2 doubled 4, 4 doubled 8, 8 doubled is 16, but he used Pythagorean reduction, so they add 6 and 1 and they get 7. 7 7 is 14, 4 and 1 is 5, back to 1. Or you could say 8 and 8 is 16, 16 and 16 is 32, 3 and 2 is 5, 32, 64, 6 and 4, back to 1. So now you've got a circulation which does odd things, and then you've got 3, 6 and 9. Anyway, it gets a bit complicated, and you get the interesting spot there. And they're doing this with magnets, coils, getting weird and wonderful effects, you know, playing with them. People are building them because it's open source, so they're all having a go. Now we talk about frequencies, interested in frequencies, 432 hertz. 432, do anybody know what concert pitch is? 440. Concert pitch, if you don't know, is what we all agreed we'd tune all our orchestras to. And funny enough, that was decided by a chap called Goebbels in the Second World War. I wouldn't trust him, but yeah, I don't know, I think it's a bit dodgy. That. Well, I think it's 8 hertz out because the coherent frequency is 432. And there's examples of this. Some of the Tibetan singing bowls, when you check them out on a frequency base, you know, to check out the base frequency is 432. Various healers in the Amazon who don't even know what 432 is, when you put them on a voice, they're all doing 432.
Actually, I think that Goebbels wanted that frequency, but they didn't come to it completely. And in 1971, here in the UK,
yes, that's it.
That's been
Is it?
decided, yeah.
Oh, in the UK?
Yeah.
I was wanting to blame Goebbels for years. So anyway, the frequency, as you point out, is 440. But I think the coherent frequency is 432, which is 8 hertz lower than that. It's a nice sound as well, 432. And so the story goes, the reading I've done, there was a Chinese emperor who basically sent out had a big empire, I can't remember his name, but he sent out his minions, and they were checking instruments, and the only job was to make sure they were tuned to 432. And when he was asked this, he said, I don't care if they're playing rap or classical, if they're on 432, we're coherent. And if we're coherent, we don't have any war. If we're incoherent, we do. Like the laminar flow in the blood and the turbulent flow, we're coherent. And that's the other reason for, you know, the resting frequency around when it shifts, which apparently it's going to around the Schumann resonance, is 1.45 hertz, something like that, 1.46. That's the resting frequency of the human heart. And if all our hearts are beating at the same frequency, we're all coherent for that moment. It's like the reset button. And that makes sense to me in a weird kind of way. The other thing I notice is it doesn't matter what group you're in, how disparate they are. If you can get this part of them bouncing, either sobbing or laughing, they're all coherent, because the diaphragm, when you're laughing, is going, ha, it's bouncing, and we're all bouncing it, and above that is the heart, so that's bouncing as well. So then we're all coherent. That's why we love comedians, I guess. That's my just theory. It could be sobbing, but I prefer laughing. Same sort of thing when you look at the structures. These are just cell arrangements based on geometry. How you get from, I suppose, the platonics to the wet stuff. Some of these ideas, but I won't go into them, I'll just skate over them. This was from a couple of years ago, which I liked. Oh, it's a few years ago now. That's the blue spiral over Norway, and it was all in the sky. And I said, oh, it's a Russian rocket. Come on, honest, you believe that? It's a Russian rocket, that is. It's a bit out of control, got a bit of hole in one of its jets, it was losing fuel. And it made this perfect pattern in the sky. All the rockets that I've seen do that goes, you know. So that's a good trick if that's an exploding rocket. So mainstream said exploding rocket, everybody's going, no, I don't think so. There's something weird going on, it looks like a portal opening to me. But anyway, whatever it is, they're anomalous effects. And we got, in a way, pay attention to anomalous effects, because going way back to Copernicus, going before him, they were saying, yeah, all heavenly bodies are on crystal globes. We know what glass is, and we can visualise that. And he says, hold on a minute. He says, there's a comet coming through here. I hear the sound of breaking glass. You know, what are you going to do now? Because they ain't on crystal globes anymore, are they? Oh, no, we'll ignore that. No, you can't look at that. So we've got all this control mechanism we like to think about down here. So the Vatican actually has paid for one of the most expensive telescopes around, because they want to know what shit's out there, but they ain't going to share it with you guys.
You call it Lucifer.
Yeah, Lucifer, the bringer of light. Well, of course you can't see light, you can only see reflections, so I might have to change his name. But I mentioned Frank Chester and the sixth platonic, so this is the shape that you get. So you can look at Frank and find out how the heart is working. So that's one of his shapes, just as long as you remember that. And these are just some of the, meterless energy. So you can type in Google top 10 exotic free energy devices, and you'll get to PESWiki, or Pure Energy, I've forgotten what the S stands for, Pure Energy Services. That's run by Sterling D. Allen. And it'll give you a nice list. It'll take you to Andrea Rossi in Italy. It'll take you to Thane Hines regenerative acceleration of an electric motor, gated magnetic motors. There's also an amazing guy, Kesh, I think it's in Iran, and he's got stuff floating around. Definitely he's been working with plasmas, healing energies, the Keshe Foundation, Keshe. There's others in there. There's the Panacea Bocaf that's run by Ross, an Australian guy, which is open sourcing all this information and sharing it with fellow lunatics. So if you want to know how to make hydroxy for your engine, it'll be in Panacea Bocaf. Humanresonance.org is Alexander Putney's site. The other information I've got, the Measuring System of the Gods, is excellent. It's got free books you can download on Tesla patents and a whole bunch of things. Loads of free books.
Can you say that one again?
The Measuring System of the Gods.
Good.
Recommend that. There's also Dollard's site. Eric Dollard, anybody heard of him?
Yeah.
Eric Dollard, look at him. I forgot what his site's called, but you'll find it. And on his site is loads of free stuff of how to make things work. Borderlands.com, that's Dollard. And you've got JLN Labs. He's testing everything. You can get access to, so if there's some weird and wonderful idea to do with magnets, gated magnets and free energy, JLN Labs has tested it. And
Can
so
you
has
spell
it got,
his name?
sorry?
Could you spell his name? JLNLABS.online.fr. But how do you recommend you go to the Keshe Foundation as well? Because what he apparently did is he was the son of a nuclear physicist and went his own route. So apparently they brought down 2 drones, these American drones that were flying up the Afghan. Is it Iran? I get Iran and Iraq mixed up. Which one hasn't been?
It was in Iran.
Iran. Okay, Iran. Yeah, it is Iran. So they got these amazing drones, wingspans almost the width of this room, maybe not quite that high. High tech, fly-by-wire. That means they're so difficult to fly, the computer's flying them. And they've got all this instrumentation, you can't, hack-proof computers and all this. And they brought one down in perfect nick. Well, if it fell out of the sky for some reason, it wouldn't be in perfect nick, so how did they get it? This is the question, and I think the Americans know this. I mean, part of the joke, people tell it. Iran obviously wants a war with America. Look where he's put his country, in amongst 150 American bases. And that sort of thing. But I think there's a darn good reason why America, or the war machine, has not entered Iran, because they've demonstrated some of the technology they have. And what they did was they had what I would call a Levity bubble, or a gravity management machine, and they flew over the drone and extended their gravity field over the drone, and then they landed it in pretty good nick. So here you've got, let's see what does a jet cost. Well, for you, Governor, it's going to be about $20 million. It does Mach 3, and it's got all this stuff on it. It's amazing kit. And so along comes one of their little fly-by-wire thing. It's doing Mach 30, and it stops above the jet, slows it down to 0, and lands it on the desert floor and just nicks off. You're not going to sell much kit then, are you? So I wonder why they haven't been in Iran. That's the way my mind works. I think it's for damn good reasons, because they've only got to do it once.
Why would they be so far ahead technologically then?
Because Keshe's had no resistance on the technology he's been developing, either monetarily or insightful.
But the Americans have got all this sort of secret project stuff.
Yeah, but when you buy that technology, you only have to buy it once. You know, jets break down, they only go so fast and they wear out, so you have to buy another, and you have to buy their new armour. It does this. But that one, just switch it on and off it goes, you know. What you going to buy, Mach 3 or Mach 30? I know one shall buy.
Yeah,
I mean,
apparently when Obama asked for his drone back, they sent him a pink model.
that's right, so the story goes, he sent him a model back. Obama asked for his drone back, they sent him a little model of it. There you go.
I think it was pink as well.
Yeah, nice pink. So all of this collapses into ridiculousness. You can see the big manipulation to do with what they call war, and we're just not going to play anymore. What's the point? If you've got all this kit that does this, you've got nothing to fight over if it's not energy. And we're just talking about how you produce your own energy, or 0-point energy. So most of the time it's, oh, they've got more than me, I've got to go invade them, they're horrible, they've got the oil, got whatever your joke is. You don't need it. If you don't need it, what are you going to fight over?
No, but they're after control of humanity, aren't they?
Well, then you get onto the nice stories, and we turn a few pages and the chapters and the reduction and the Georgia Stones and the Illuminati and the 300 and those at the top. God bless them. I'm over here doing something else. Good luck to you guys. I think they'll arrange a special planet for you. Well, it won't be around here because we're doing this.
I've got a question. I'm just curious about if anybody's producing domestic systems.
Domestic systems.
Yeah, any of your
Allegedly, I mean, I haven't. I've made some inquiries, but there's Andrea Rossi in Italy is making a 10 or 15 kilowatt unit for about 2,000 quid. So you apparently buy it once. You have to change the fuel every 6 months. But you're off grid, basically. That's what you're talking about. That's why they're saying the magic word is meterless energy. Because when Tesla was building Watercliff, as I said before, JP Morgan said, well, we're going to put the meters, and he had to pull it down. We're talking about meterless energy for everyone, one way or another.
Health freedom side that are not
And that's not the only way of doing it. There's Kesh in Iran, he's got small units that will be for sale. There's the Searle effect generator in California, that's doing 15 kilowatts. There's a Russian equivalent. There's gated magnetic motors. There's dozens. Thane Hines from Canada has got self-accelerating motors. He's got a 3 kilowatt motor powering a 7, and the whole lot's putting out 15. So you've got more power coming out than you have going in. Funny enough, it runs cold. That's the hint. If it's running hot, you're wasting energy. You're on the wrong end.
Cold fusion.
And there's so-called cold fusion, which is sometimes known as low-energy nuclear change. And that's what Pons and Fleischmann were on in the late 90s and were buried. But they're still generating. Yeah, there's a whole story. There's always a bad guy. But anyway, we've covered enough ground to at least sow the seeds. You can do your own research. All you've got to do is in Google, top 10 exotic free energy devices, press enter.
Shall we say thanks very much? I think we're going to have to say fantastic talk. He's a real inspiration, and as I said, he's an engineer in a garage somewhere who's just been laid off from the rover that builds the next zero or low energy input and high energy output device. They're already doing it, they just can't tell anyone, I'm sure of it. So thanks very much, John, for raising it, and please look here. John's here in the barn on Sunday, and at 8:30 tonight we've got Lawrence mainly doing about the ley lines and King Arthur. So we've got 2 hours off, unless you've got a question for John, or you can sort of rephrase it. He's done 2 hours. Like a 2 hour shift. So, as I said, I'm honoured.